paranormal. It surrounds us. It's everywhere. Tonight, you will hear from the people who live and work within these highly active locations, all in the efforts to discover America's most haunted. With your host, ghost hunter and author, Dan Terry.
Good evening, boys and ghouls. I am Dan Terry, your ghost host with the most haunted, but I'm going to be sliding back over a little more into, I'm going to call it conspiracy for now. You know, when I was a kid, back in the mid to late 70s, when dinosaurs and Datsuns and Pontiacs ruled the earth, there was this thing that used to come up, and I'm sure anyone my age would remember, when the big claim was that heavy metal rock bands were playing satanic verses and satanic stuff, and you could only hear it if you ran the record backwards, which maybe there was a little to it. I don't know. They were saying the bands like AC/DC and Led Zeppelin were evil and all of this. I, again, don't know. I have a hard time believing it, but there it is. Well, my guest tonight is going to be kind of an interesting take on things similar. His name is Robert Sullivan. He's a historian, an antiquarian, an author, and about 10 other things on his list of accomplishments he's done. I think he even included Masonic, very, very high in the Masonics. And mainstream movies, and I'm sure you guys have heard the rumors, there's video on it all the time that, the guy who did Eyes Wide Shut, I can't remember the director's name, but he said that they said there is stuff in one of his movies that directly show how he was involved in faking the moon landing on a sound set and stuff like that. Well, Rob has a different take on it, and he's going to show us some of the mainstream things in movies, mainstream films that actually do show stuff we're not expecting. And we're going from all the way back to the Wizard of Oz and the original Frankenstein up to Smurfs and Harry Potter. So let's get on to Robert Sullivan and see what he's got how he says it. Hey, how you doing, Rob?
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me on the Most Haunted podcast. It's my pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Well, I'm glad you could make it because I find this kind of topic just exhilarating. It's incredibly interesting. And you've done so much research on it. You've got 3 books on the topic, and that includes Symbolism in Cinema and Fight Club, Star Wars, Back to the Future. Those are some big, heavy movies. And then you've got 2 more books on the topic. Tell me what you think on some of this. How does it start? How do you find it?
Right. Well, it's just, one of the things that I always say is when you're looking at this stuff in films, you always have to pay attention to the context, because things in different movies can mean different things. There's no universal answer to it. You always have to look at the context of how this material is presented. That certainly will help in the decoding of the material. Some of the stuff that you were saying during the intro is somewhat true. I mean, Stanley Kubrick probably did film the moon landing footage. There is substantial evidence for that. There is a very occult influence on rock and roll. You look at the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper, you have Aleister Crowley on it. And of course, right on the cover in the upper left-hand corner, Led Zeppelin, of course, was very influenced by Crowley, especially Jimmy Page. And, you can argue that Sgt. Pepper himself is Aleister Crowley. When did Aleister Crowley die? In 1947, right at the outset of the birth of rock and roll. What's the first lyric of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? It was 20 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. The record came out in 1967. 20 years ago, Crowley died. Thus, he taught the band to play. So you will definitely find a heavy occult influence on the rock industry. Regarding the movies, I mean, yeah, I mean, it can have a sinister connotation, but again, my research has led me to believe that I think a lot of the decoding of it has to do in the answer lies in how it's presented and the surrounding circumstances of how it's presented.
Okay, and when we're discussing all of this and we're getting into some major stuff, um, what made you start looking at that? Did you see things that other people didn't in these?
Right. Well, one of the impetuses for me doing this was it went to back when I was a child. I'm right around your time frame. I was born in 1971, and growing up, of course, I was a huge fan of the Star Wars movies by George Lucas. And it was when I was in high school I discovered that. I mean, this was one of the things that got the ball rolling on this was that the Star Wars stories, and I'm really referring to episodes 4, 5, and 6 at this point, was essentially rebranded and repackaged mythology. This
Okay.
story had been told 100 times over in different cultures. Lucas had just changed the names around and had rebranded it and turned it into a space western, essentially, a space opera.
Yes.
So one of the big tip-offs this was a book written by an American mythologist named Joseph Campbell. The book is A Hero with a Thousand Faces. When you read that book, it will completely open your eyes up to where Lucas got the whole idea and some of the key plot devices for for Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things that really drew me into this. And then again, it was really around the turn of the millennium, around the year 2000, that Hollywood, and I don't know if this was conscious or not. I don't think it was. I think it was probably more of a subconscious mechanism of some kind. We had a boatload of Gnostic movies being released.
Okay.
Quite startling. I don't think it was done intentionally. And you also had at that same time, right around there, right after that, you had the National Treasure movie, and that's very interesting. That was one of the main movies I took on in my first book, Royal Arch. The reason I included that movie in that book was because that movie, this is the first National Treasure movie. It is literally a Masonic ritual on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
13th degree of the Scottish Rite, the 7th of the York Rite. So that really kind of got the ball, really rolling on all this. My first book was about the Royal Arch of Enoch, was about Masonic symbolism and philosophy and history. And I ended that chapter bringing everything up to modern day, where I included an analysis of what I would call Enochic Masonic solar movies. Some of the things covered were, of course, the first National Treasure movie, the second one, Da Vinci Code, Excalibur, movies like that. And I parlayed that into 3 more movie books, which just were exclusively talking about movie symbolism.
Okay.
And I'm currently working on a 4th book right now. I'm actually working on 2 movie books, Cinema Symbolism 4, appropriately enough. And I'm doing a book, solely on The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is a movie I have touched on before,
Mm-hmm.
but I've discovered in the last year, there is some very, very interesting numerology and things going on with the Wizard of Oz that is honestly quite astounding.
Okay. Let's start with the 1932 Frankenstein. What did you find on that one?
Right. Well, one of the things that I should point out, and this is where Frankenstein ties into this, is Hollywood is not the first medium, or movies or TV, to incorporate occult themes or esoteric themes or hidden undercurrents in productions. I trace it all the way back to Philip Marlowe and William Shakespeare, who was probably Sir Francis Bacon. One of the reasons why Frankenstein is so critical is this. The monster comes out of the world of Hermeticism and Jewish mysticism. The monster himself, this is, of course, the Boris Karloff character,
Mm-hmm.
is what's known as a Kabbalistic golem. And you could also maybe categorize him as what's known as a Hermetic statue. So what are they? So a golem is a inanimate object, usually made out of clay, but it's shaped into human form that acts and behaves like a human being. Although it's man-made, there's no soul in it. A Hermetic statue runs very parallel with that. That comes out of the Hermetica, a series of books from the 2nd, 3rd century that many in the Renaissance thought were written by a sage known as Hermes Trismegistus.
Okay.
So the monster himself is a very ancient idea that predates Hollywood and even predates Mary Shelley. This idea of a Hebrew or Kabbalistic magic, hermetic magic to imbue life into an inanimate object. So the Frankenstein monster is really one of the first incarnations in Hollywood of this Kabbalistic golem. It's not the first, but it is one of the first. And this is a very popular subject in Hollywood. And again, the Frankenstein movie is really one of the first iterations of this. But the whole idea of, sort of creating life out of nothingness. I mean, you're into the entire world of AI. We can draw parallels with, well, I mean, if you just want to stick with the golem or the hermetic statue aspect, I mean, we're into things that are very popular in modern day. I mean, at least growing up when I was a kid. I mean, if you look at the, you mentioned this in the intro. I mean, if you look at the Smurfs, Smurfette is a Kabbalistic golem. She was a lump of clay that was created by Gargamel through his black magic to essentially invade or infiltrate is probably the better word, the Smurf village and turn it upside down.
Okay.
Frosty the Snowman, the famous Christmas song. Again, it's a humanoid creature that is brought to life by a magic hat. Again, this would fall into the category of a hermetic statue or Kabbalistic golem. And you could take this to a step further and you look at things like Blade Runner, in Blade Runner 49, the replicants, AI, robots. These are also variants of the hermetic statue or the Kabbalistic golem. So the Frankenstein movie with Shelley is a very important one. And one of the things I would say, if you watch that movie, pay attention. The one thing that's very overt in those Frankenstein movies, it turns up in the first one, and I believe it's in maybe The Ghost of Frankenstein. Maybe it's The Bride of Frankenstein. I'd have to go look. There's a lot of Christian symbolism in those movies, and it's the whole idea of man playing God. You just pay attention to it. I mean, you will see Christian iconography all over the place. I mean, and it's even at one point, and I think it is in Bride of Frankenstein, but I'd have to go look, where they actually go so far as to essentially crucify the monster. They raise him up on a cross, and the whole idea behind this is that he's sort of being martyred for the scientific revolution. So again, the Frankenstein. This is the 1932 one with Karloff. Very important movie.
It's amazing how you find all that. Kabbalah would you call that a kind of a Jewish version of black magic?
No, that's a complete misnomer. It can be used for that. Kabbalah is essentially a Hebrew mystery school. It's two things at once, and this is why it causes so much confusion. The easiest way to explain it is, I have to backpedal a little bit, is the easiest way to understand Hebrew Kabbalah is you have to understand something else first. Okay. And the thing you have to understand first is what's called as Valentinian Gnosticism, because Kabbalah and Gnosticism and specifically the Valentinian strain of it run very parallel. So I'm not going to get into it. We don't have enough time, but the idea of Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, where this becomes so confusing is the Sephirah are not only, they're two things at once. They are emanations of the Godhead. They are, and this is in Gnosticism, these are what are called aeons. They run completely parallel, but they're also, and this is where it gets very confusing, is they're also essentially super celestial spheres of spiritual purification. They're sort of like rungs of levels of tests going up to the Godhead. And each one of these spheres is a sort of like an obstacle course your soul has to navigate in order to progress. Mm-hmm. And again, you'll see this in Gnosticism with things like the aeons. If you want to look to this in cinema, inevitably this ties into the element of the Road of Trials with Campbell. And what I'm referring to is, I mean, we'll go to the Wizard of Oz, for instance. Yeah. I mean, if you pay attention to that, like when Dorothy gets to the Wonderland, Oz, she has a series of tests that are put in front of her in order to receive Gnosis, or in order to receive the Godhead, which is the wizard. And it's each one of these little trials she has to go through. It's sort of a spiritual purification test. One of them is, of course, she has to conquer the Wicked Witch. And if you know Hebrew Kabbalah, this syncs with the sphere Gevurah, which is the evil female archetype. So when you're looking at things like the Wizard of Oz, essentially it's like a Kabbalistic Gnostic journey through this wonderland. And the purpose of this is to receive gnosis. In the mystery religions, this is what is called to know thyself. So that's an example of this. So it is confusing. I mean, it can confuse people. If the person has an understanding of the Valentinian thread of Gnosticism, then Kabbalah becomes much more easier to understand.
Okay. Well, you've hit two of the older ones. What about, let's say, I think it's well established that Ian Fleming knew Aleister Crowley. And of course, in ghost hunting, Aleister Crowley is very, very well known.
Sure.
But did that somehow blend into the James Bond movies?
Absolutely. During World War II, Crowley was a spy for the UK. He was basically a counter spy. The guy who was his handler in British intelligence was none other than Ian Fleming, of all people. Mm-hmm. Fleming, of course, as you pointed out, went on to write the James Bond stories. And the question then becomes does the James Bond stories and the movies incorporate or include any sort of occult, esoteric Crowleyan themes? And the answer is absolutely yes. Okay. James Bond himself is a character out of Elizabethan England named John Dee. And John Dee was Queen Elizabeth I's court astrologer. He was a spy also. He did some espionage work for Queen Elizabeth I. He traveled the Holy Roman Empire. He tried to mess around with the Holy Roman Empire, Rudolph II. And Dee, he was a magician. He was a mathematician. He was into navigation. I mean, a real polymath. When Dee would send espionage correspondences to Queen Elizabeth, he would always sign them 007. And the sigil was supposed to be two circles with a line over it and down the side. And the idea was it was supposed to be spyglasses. And the idea was that he was her eyes in the field and that the communication was for her eyes only. So James Bond is actually John Dee. And then when you get into the Bond movies, you have all sorts of alchemical, occult, Rosicrucian, you call them what you will, illusions. I mean, the whole idea with Bond is in order to go on and defeat the over-the-top villain, there has to be a spiritual unification with the female, call her the Bond girl, as it were. And this is, of course, goes way back in time to alchemy, the unification of the sun and moon, sol and luna. This is what's known as coincidentia oppositorum, the alchemical wedding. And then, of course, after that occurs, Bond is now spiritually equipped to go on and defeat the over-the-top villain. And Crowley turns up. I mean, the character, the guy who runs the Illuminati in the Bond novels, Spectre, is Ernst Stavro Blofeld. And Blofeld in which one is it? It's on Her Majesty's Secret Service. The Blofeld in that is based on Crowley, and where Fleming got the idea for that was Crowley. One of the things he always was doing was he would always introduce himself as Scottish royalty, Lord Boleskine, things like that. It was all fraud. I mean, he was just making it up. I mean, Crowley wasn't any more Scottish royalty than you and I are. But if you're familiar with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, this is the movie where Telly Savalas plays Blofeld. The Blofeld character is always trying to hold himself out as like a French count or something like that, like the Comte de Bloshaw or something like that. He's pretending to be something that he's not. So that's pure Aleister Crowley. And then in Casino Royale, Le Chiffre is also Crowley. Le Chiffre uses a inhaler for asthma, and that's an allusion to Crowley because he had asthma during the end years of his life when Fleming knew him from all his drug abuse and what have you. So Crowley does turn up twice in the Fleming novels and the movies. So if you're watching for On Her Majesty's Secret Service or you're watching Casino Royale, the villains in that are literally supposed to be Aleister Crowley.
Okay, that's amazing. I had never even thought of that. Moving along, what else do we have here? You talked about Fight Club. What was the symbolism there?
Right. Well, Fight Club, it falls into the category of one of these Gnostic films that came out right before the turn of the millennium. It again, it relates to the Gnostic theme of the material world is an illusion. It's no good. It's meant to be destroyed. It's the product of this inferior god, which in Gnosticism is known as the demiurge. And you will have, if you watch Fight Club, I mean, the whole idea is this nihilism against reality, against materialism, and that's a very Gnostic theme. The one thing I should point out that makes these movies, these Gnostic movies, so interesting is a lot of them, not all of them, do include little foreshadowing of the September 11th, 2001 terror event. And we will find that in Fight Club. So, for instance, I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head. You have the destruction of the piece of corporate artwork in that, which is clearly meant to be the Sphere, which is the piece of artwork that was in the original World Trade Center Plaza. I mean, that gets destroyed. At the very end of the movie, the two financial buildings come crumbling down because of controlled demolitions. Brad Pitt's character, Tyler Durden, refers to it as Ground Zero. I mean, and this is only a couple years before 9/11. I mean, you get into movies like The Matrix, which again is a very, very Valentinian Gnostic movie, which again ties into the whole idea of awakening to reality, the death of the old age, the welcoming of the new age. Neo being the Christ illuminator character, in that the character of Jesus in Valentinian Gnosticism plays a little bit of a different role than he does in Orthodox Christianity. In the Orthodox version, Christ is the redeemer of sin. In Gnosticism, he is the illuminator character who is sent here to awaken mankind to the, demiurge's trickery and to basically go, tear down reality, as it were. But in The Matrix, if you pay attention to it, and you do have to pause the movie and turn the screen upside down, Neo's passport actually expires on September 11th, 2001, which is very interesting. I mean, the date is right there. So one of the things that's very interesting with those Gnostic movies, and they're not the only ones to do it. You can go way back in time. This is one of the topics in my new book, Cinema Symbolism 4, is these allusions to 9/11 in popular culture that are quite disturbing, to say the least. And there's a lot of them. There's different ways to look at this. I'll wrap up on this. I mean, in some movies, it's without question that the filmmaker has intentionally placed things in this. I mean, Kubrick was known for doing this. Alfred Hitchcock, David Lynch, Aronofsky, Aaron Astor, William Friedkin, people like that. And yeah, you can find movies that foreshadow the future events, such as, like the China Syndrome. I think it was released maybe 1 or 2 weeks before 3 Mile Island. The 9/11 stuff I almost put into a different category now because it goes way back in time. And I'm of the opinion, and this is just me personally, and again, I'll get into more detail on this in my new book. I believe the 9/11 foreshadowing is a supernatural event. I believe this is coming right out of the world of the supernatural, the paranormal. That's the only way I can describe it.
That would include all the references in The Simpsons prior to that.
Right. I mean, you have allusions to. I mean, the main one with The Simpsons, which that's actually something I talk about in one of my other books. But you have The Simpsons. I mean, it's countless. I mean, there's stuff in Fight Club. There's stuff in Donnie Darko, Vanilla Sky, The Simpsons. I mean, you go way back in time, movies like Asteroid. So I have to pull up my list. It's quite exhaustive. Yeah. It's quite extensive. But yeah, there is definitely some strange things going on.
That is, and that's incredible. All right, Rob, I'm going to step out of here for just a moment, and then throw a couple of things up here, and we'll be right back. So hold on for just a second, would you?
You got it.
All right. I remember that scene in one of the Simpsons cartoons where he was holding the brochure for a bus trip to New York, and it had the towers, and it was costing $9 to make the trip. So it was 911 with the towers being the 11, and those other things. I mean, so much in all of this. Gotta wonder, is it paranormal, or is somebody trying to tell us something? I don't know. But you know what? I will tell you this. I'm going to be trying to tell you something. And we're going to start with this right here. Be right back.
This is Margie Kay, and I'd like to say thank you to all of our KUNX show hosts, staff, listeners, and viewers for making us number one on Paranormal Talk Radio.
All right, friends, you saw there's so much going on. We need to get you over here to unxnetwork.com, put in the information. I think it just basically requires your email address and become a member. It's pretty much that simple. You get access to the blog, you get access to the magazines, you get access to the newsletter, information on the shows, so much going on. So you need to join up, and we'll talk more about that after the show. But I want to get back to Rob because I'm really digging this. This is cool. Rob, so many of these shows and movies you've mentioned, Fight Club and well, all of them. What else do you have to prove your point?
Right. So we can certainly talk about one of the topics that we mentioned you mentioned at the beginning of the show was Stanley Kubrick.
Yes.
He's certainly an interesting character in all this. There's a lot of ways you can look at Kubrick. Clearly, I am convinced more than ever that he did, in fact, film the moon landing footage. There's an allusion to in the movie being there, of all things, to this. If you remember when Chauncey Gardner, I know it's not a Kubrick film, but Chauncey Gardner, this is near the beginning, Peter Sellers, who is approaching the TV shop, and the shop store window is the moon surface. And in the window is a camera, and it's actually projecting Peter Sellers' image onto the moon or into the television shop. And what makes that scene so interesting, where you say, so what? What's that have to do with Kubrick? Well, when you watch the movie, the music that is playing in the background is Also Sprach Zarathustra, which is, of course, the theme to Kubrick's one of his most famous movies, which is 2001. The music is by Richard Strauss, of course. And then, of course, also Peter Sellers was one of Kubrick's actors. He was in Lolita and he was Dr. Strangelove. So when you couple that all together, it definitely points to Kubrick was definitely up to something. I mean, and it's really no stretch at all because, certainly when you get into movies like Strangelove and 2001, I mean, the theory is that the government or NASA saw these and hired Kubrick to stage the footage. Of course, he gives this away in The Shining. When Danny stands up with the Apollo 11, sweater on and goes to room 237. and 237 is a reference to the distance from the moon to
Mhm.
the distance from the Earth to the moon in the late 80s, or excuse me, in the late 70s, 237,000 miles. So that's in The Shining. I should point out that one of the things that's very interesting about The Shining is that movie is literally, and we won't have time to get into it, literally a temple of repetition that Kubrick just repeats everything over and over and over again. I'm convinced that he got that from a movie that came out about 7 years earlier, a movie that starred Donald Sutherland called Don't Look Now,
Okay.
which is really one of the first movies to really include repetition as what I would call an occult mnemonic. And I think Kubrick was very impressed with that. And if you watch The Shining, I talk about this in the new book, there's actually an allusion in The Shining to Don't Look Now. And I believe Kubrick did that on purpose because I think he was using some of the repetition techniques in The Shining that he got from Don't Look Now. I should point out repetition is one of the most easiest forms of memory control or mind control. Is just repeating things over and over again.
Sure.
And in cinema, it would be you're embedding the movie into the person's subconscious. One of the things I'd also like to point out with Kubrick is, and this is sort of one of the smoking guns, as it were, the movie that Stanley Kubrick made before The Shining is a movie about the Napoleonic Wars, or at least set in the Napoleonic Wars, called Barry Lyndon. And this is very interesting because when Kubrick filmed that, he wanted to film scenes by candlelight, and you couldn't really do it. I mean, if you go back in time and you watch movies, if there's a scene in the movie that's set to candlelight, inevitably you can always see a light, an off-camera lighting source.
Mhm.
Kubrick didn't want that. He actually wanted to film the movie or certain scenes by candlelight. Believe it or not, NASA had actually developed lenses that allowed for this, and NASA gave them to him. Essentially, Kubrick went to NASA and said, "Hey, I want to use these lenses you guys have developed," and without question, they gave them to him to film. I mean, and of course, it begs the question, why would NASA give Kubrick lenses to film a movie with? I mean, the question kind of answers itself. Is because he filmed the moon landing stuff for him. I mean, he was basically an employee of them. So that's really, in my opinion, if you want to look towards a smoking gun, it's without question the Barry Lyndon movie. And I am without question. There are other examples. There are things that Kubrick does in The Shining. I'm not going to get into them. It's too long to get into.
There's a lot.
Go ahead.
Videos. There's videos about it on YouTube, loaded with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things those videos aren't aware of, though. One of the things that's really unique is, and this is something I get into in all my books, and this is it's really an art of memory trick. I originally started calling this thing occult casting, which is a term I stand by, but it really falls under this Renaissance mnemonic called the art of memory. And what filmmakers will do, especially the adroit ones, is they will cast an actor in their movies, and it's usually not a leading part. It can be, but it's usually some minor figure of some kind.
Okay.
And the idea is that by putting this actor in your movie, it will transfer the essence of this actor's earlier work or a specific movie into the new picture. And Kubrick does this in The Shining. I can't remember the actor's name. But it's the guy who plays the hotel manager. And it's a long, drawn-out story. I'm not going to get into it right now. Like I said, I could spend an hour talking about this. But Kubrick was using this actor to convey something about the moon landing. And other directors do it too. I'll give you an example real quick. I'll get off of Kubrick. This is one of the best examples, so the listeners have an idea of what I'm talking about. Is in the Star Wars movie, which was Episode 7, The Force Awakens, when I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. When you watch that movie and you watch the beginning of it, Max von Sydow makes a brief appearance in it. And I think he puts something in the robot or the droid, and it takes off, and then Sydow steps out of his hovel. The First Order arrives, Kylo Ren comes out and basically kills Max von Sydow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the question that's always kind of stuck in my head as a splinter. I was like, well, why would you cast Max von Sydow in this very, very minor part? He's in the movie, I think, less than 5 minutes, just to be killed off. And it's a trick. It's a mind. I don't want to use the word mind control, but it's an occult trick that goes back to this thing called the art of memory.
Okay.
So what this is doing is it's wreaking havoc with the viewer's subconscious mind, because by placing Max von Sydow in that movie, it's actually invoking two of von Sydow's other movies and transferring an essence into the Star Wars movie. So I'll explain. So when von Sydow comes out of his hovel and he's confronted by the Dark Lord, all right, we're on a desert planet. So let's go back in time. What movie do we know that von Sydow starts on in a desert and confronts a dark evil overlord and winds up getting killed at the end? I mean, it's The Exorcist, of course. So that entire scene is designed to transfer the essence of Pazuzu and the demonism into the First Order. But it's all done subconsciously, and it's all done just by placing von Sydow in that movie. But it doesn't end there, because then the question then begs itself. You had von Sydow in the Star Wars movie. He's a hermit. We know he's a hermit in The Exorcist. Is there any other von Sydow movies where he lives on a desert planet and is a hermit, only to be struck down by a dark evil overlord? Of course, Dune. So again, by placing von Sydow, what the filmmakers are doing is they are transferring the essence of Pazuzu and the Harkonnens into Kylo Ren in the First Order. It's very occult. It's a form of sorcery. It's very clever. And the really adroit filmmakers in Hollywood play this card all the time.
Okay. Have you seen any more recent movies, more the last couple of years, that you'd have an example of?
I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, I did in the last book. I took on Midsommar and the first Joker movie, which were both overloaded with stuff. The book I'm working on right now, Cinema Symbolism 4. I haven't seen the first Omen yet, so I want to take a look at that. I haven't seen Late Night with the Devil. I want to see that. There's a movie, the Joker sequel is coming out in October, so I've got to see that. I am doing an analysis of Barbie, which is The Wizard of Oz only backwards. So that's a more recent movie. So yeah, I do keep abreast of recent movies, and if I see something going on, I'll talk about it.
Anything in the Avenger films, from Iron Man to Captain America to Endgame?
You're not the first person to ask me that. Unfortunately, growing up as a boy here in Baltimore, I was not a Marvel fan. I was a DC fan. So
Okay.
I am a huge Batman, Superman, Justice League, Wonder Woman. The DC superheroes were always more appealing to me than the Marvel ones. So I have to confess that I am completely lacking when it comes to the Marvel movies.
All right. Back to the Future. You had that on the cover of one of your books.
Right. That's very complex.
Okay.
This movie does include allusions to the 9/11 events. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure, people like them. In my opinion, and it's just me, I always found them to be one of the weakest ones. I think there's much more better evidence. But there is allusions to 9/11 in Back to the Future. The reason I don't like them is inevitably you have to turn things upside down and stand on your head and this, that, and the other. And that to me is always kind of a stretch. There is a lot of unique things going on in that movie. Back to the Future is one of those ones where I like it so much, and I like the entire trilogy so much, because it's really one of those type of movies where almost every time I watch it, I pick up on something new. And it's not a lot of movies that I can say that about. The Back to the Future movies, at their heart and soul, are, and I'm really discussing the first one, are really a retelling of Egyptian mythology. And I'm talking about the old ancient Osirian cycle with Osiris, Isis, Typhon, Horus. I mean, clearly the Marty McFly character is the Horus figure. The Doc Brown character is Hermes Trismegistus. The number 8, I mean, they're not the first movies to use this. The number 8 turned on its side is the Lemnis Gate. That's the time for manipulation of space-time. So that's why the thing always, the DeLorean has the 88 miles an hour and to break the time barrier. There's a very hidden allusion to that in the time the clock tower gets struck by lightning. If you remember the movie, it's 10:04. That's not only a date, but it's not only a time, but a date, October 4th. And you say to yourself, well, why? What's the significance of October 4th? And of course, October 4th means on that date, there are 88 days left to the solar calendar. So that's one of the reasons why the DeLorean has to hit 88 miles an hour. There is a really interesting, it's almost impossible to pick up on. And I'd have to pull up Internet Movie Database, but it's the actor, and this is the first movie, and this is very clever. And this is just like a hidden little illusion. You may even want to call it an Easter egg. Let me pull this up because I gotta. Hang on one sec. Here we go. No, that's not it. 1 second. So, right, here we go. One moment. Go to Internet Movie Database. Yeah, here we go. So, if you pay attention to Back to the Future, if you remember when I think it's at the beginning of the movie, and I know he makes a presence when he comes back. Remember when Marty comes back and he bumps into the bum, Red the bum?
Yeah.
Red the bum, and he's just like crazy drunk driver or anything, something like that. Well, if you remember, Marty is like running down the street, and this is very clever.
Mm-hmm.
On the movie theater is a movie that's playing called Orgy American Style,
Okay.
and that's a movie that stars George Buck Flower, who is the actor who played Red the Bum.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Easter egg, and a very clever one, to the movie It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart. And when Jimmy Stewart is running down the main street at the end of the movie, one of the movie that's playing is The Bells of St. Mary in New Bedford Falls. And I believe that's a movie that starred Jimmy Stewart. I'd have to look. So the whole idea is, what are the two parallels between the two movies? Why are the Back to the Future movie makers including that parallel to It's a Wonderful Life? Because both star protagonists who are being erased from time. And that's a very, very, very clever illusion that they put in there. That's next to impossible to find out.
Yeah. All right. You brought up Buck Flower, which reminds me of They Live, which seemed to have a lot of stuff in there, which is one of my favorites. I think it was foretelling the future we have now.
Right. The They Live movie. This is a film that I took on, I believe, in Cinema Symbolism 2 or 3. I can't remember now. John Carpenter. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, and he does include a lot of unique things in his film, without question. There's a lot of psychology going on inside Halloween. The They Live movie. This is again one of those movies that you could categorize. You can look at this movie one of two ways. You can look at it as a Gnostic film, which is, I think, the correct way to look at it, where clearly the aliens are what you would call archons, sort of the henchmen of this false god known as the Demiurge. So They Live, and again, this ties into things like The Matrix, where the reality that the Roddy Piper character is living in is an illusion. It's a false reality. And again, this ties into a Gnostic philosopher. There's three of them. There's Valentinius, there's Basilides, and there's Mani. And I'm going to condense a lot of material into a very short answer. One of the Basilides, one of the philosophers, essentially what he said was, in order to defeat the archons, or at least one of the ways to negate them and negate this false reality, is to embrace oblivion, to become nothingness. And I find it very interesting that the Roddy Piper character, who eventually goes on to defeat the space alien archons, his name is Nada, which is Spanish for nothing.
Right.
I found that very interesting. I believe that is a complete allusion to, I guess, Basilidian, not sure if that's a word, Gnosticism. So I'm a huge John Carpenter fan. I analyze a lot of his films in my books, and in his films there's usually a lot going on.
That one in particular, I thought there was a lot going on with the subliminal messaging, which is kind of falls into what you're talking about to a degree.
Right. Well, it's actually against the law to place subliminal messaging in movies. And what I mean by that is you can put things in. You can do what I'm talking about, but you
Mhm.
can't use it for advertising.
Sure.
Um, so like for example, the way they get around that is, so if you want to advertise in a movie, it's called product placement, and you pay a fee, and then like the main character drinks a Diet Pepsi or whatever. I guess one of the most famous stories of product placement in a film was, I'll tell the story real quick because a lot of people may or may not know about it. It's the Steven Spielberg movie E.T. Um, and,
Yes.
and you probably know where I'm heading with this. If you're familiar with sort of the legend of that film, the E.T. space alien was originally supposed to be eating M&Ms, and they were filming it with him eating M&Ms. And about halfway through the movie, an M&M representative or someone at M&M's caught wind of this and went to the set and said, hey, you can't do that. You got to get our permission first. And the filmmakers, well, look, we want to use M&Ms. You're going to get, a lot of revenue from this if we can put M&Ms in your movie. In the movie, the M&M sales will spike essentially.
Sure.
And believe it or not, M&M's passed, and they said no. Space aliens do not eat M&Ms. Take it out of the movie. So they did, and of course, the M&Ms were replaced by Reese's Pieces, and the rest is history.
It is. What was that, World War Z, where Brad Pitt, for no reason on God's earth, stopped, put money into a Pepsi machine, got out a Pepsi, and drank it on screen before moving
Right.
on. It had
Right.
nothing to do with it.
You're right. That's product placement.
Yeah.
So you could do like occult symbolism and things like that, and hidden little tropes, but you can't really use subliminal messages to sell a product, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But they don't do that anyway. They just do the product placement.
But in They Live, it was actually there.
Right.
They couldn't see it with their conscious eyes, but they could see it
Right.
subconsciously.
Right. Well, that was the whole thing with. You're right. I mean, that was the whole thing with They Live. Is the whole thing was, it was about materialism. It was about accepting of materialism. And even if you remember, it was the idea that the TV or the wave was putting people to sleep. And again, this is a form of consciousness, but it resembled sleep. And again, this is essentially a very Gnostic tenet. I mean, you could turn to the Matrix movie, where the people are not conscious of their true condition. And this is the same theme in They Live. That whole idea, that concept is Gnostic, that the reality that we live in is essentially a falsehood, and you have to break free of it. The question then becomes, how do you break free of it? And then again, that becomes, who do you want to listen to?
Sure. Rob, where is your books available at? And I've got the Cinema Symbolism, and so much in that I didn't recognize when you sent me that. And then 2 and 3.
Right. So I had you advertised the 3 movie books, and thank you for that. I also have a book out on Freemasonry, and I have a work of fiction out. All of my books are available in all the main online retailers, whether it be Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. I have a website, which is www.robertwsullivan4. That's the number 4.com. I had to change it 2 months ago for various reasons. Nothing negative, but I won't bore you with it. So my website is www.robertwsullivan, the number 4.com. My name is Robert W. Sullivan the Fourth. That's why. If you go there, there's links to purchase the books, information about me, information about upcoming shows that I'm doing. This podcast will be posted there once it's over and gets stationed on YouTube. Again, all my books are available on all the main online retailers. You can get the print editions, you can get the ebooks. And again, if you want information about me, links to buy the books, information about what I'm up to, check out my blogs. I sometimes put little previews up of my forthcoming work. Again, it's www.robertwsullivan4.com.
All right. Well, Rob, thanks for coming on, because it's been something I've never done before, but it's been great. And I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you, Dan, so much for having me on Most Haunted, and it was my pleasure to be here. And when Cinema Symbolism 4 comes out, we'll do it all over again.
Let me know. We will do that. because I can't wait to see it. Take care now. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, my friends, as you saw, oh, wow. What do you think about that? The symbolism, and I was originally comparing it to the back, whatever they called it, of the original rock music, and the heavy metal at least. And yet, it wasn't exactly it. It was so much deeper into it. It's kind of intriguing. It's an intriguing thought. We need to hit that one again sometime soon. Hey, another intriguing thought is to get you all to join up with the UNX Network. You go to, and I flashed it on the screen once or twice, unxnetwork.com, fill in the paperwork. You get a free blog, which, God, the blog's been going crazy lately with all the UFO stuff going on. Of course, the newsletter, and naturally, you get the magazines. This is a couple of the older ones, but they come to your mailbox, if you're a member, once a month. And it's got some of the best writers in ghosts and such right now. I've got one in the blue one there, the darker one. That was a Halloween issue, and we talked about the haunted Battleship North Carolina. And also I had a short article on Halloween legends. And by Halloween legends, I was referring to the idea back in the 70s, they used to tell us that somebody was going to kidnap blonde-haired, blue-eyed virgins on Halloween and sacrifice them, and it was crazy. But I got articles like that. There's a lot better writers than me coming up, and they are also on there. And it's free. All you got to do is join. We also have, of course, the X-Con coming up October 11th through the 13th in Springfield, Missouri. It's in a humongous and beautiful resort, great pool, kind of got a tropical island thing going around the pool. And the rooms are awesome. I had one that I was just amazed at. But guys, the UNX, or the X-Con, we were doing our deal there. Had some lectures, had some awesome lectures about cryptids, ghosts, ghost hunting, conspiracies, UFOs, a lot of UFO stuff. And I'm sitting in the back watching it all go down, and shadow people start crossing between me and the stage. Several other people saw it too. Turns out the hotel's haunted. And this trip, this time, we're going to be doing a little more about that. We are actually going to be there showing folks how, I will be showing them how to use dowsing rods to ghost hunt, and we are going to try and make some contact. We got so much going on here, guys. You need to join up on unxnetwork.com. And I'm going to back out of here. It's been great. And Rob was just awesome. So, guys, all I can say is stay cool and stay spooked. Take care.